So I'm more than delighted and honored to have my mentor and source of inspiration, Professor Mike Merzenich, give a talk here. Mike is in Israel for some, I don't know, what brought you to Israel? Lots of things that at one day will be public. But anyhow, I think Mike, whom you might have been introduced to in textbook, Mike, I don't know how to summarize your contribution, but I will say just two things so that you will have time to say your recent part two contributions. And I think Mike's contributions, the way I see them, have two lines. One is so I'm talking about Mike's seminal contribution to neuroscience and actually to society. So one, I think, is our understanding that adults, humans, and other species have plasticity, sensory plasticity, that can be detected in cortices, in sensory cortices, even after the critical period. Forever, maybe. And maybe part two will tell us about it. So Mike is a pioneer in showing that there is adult plasticity, and namely there is a plasticity past the critical period, sensory plasticity. I don't know if he will talk about it today. And the other thing, which I think is immensely impressive, is his pioneering understanding that even though there's so much we don't understand in neuroscience, we cannot avoid or drop or not try to use the knowledge that we have to the benefit of the society. So the idea is that even though we have so many missing holes in our understanding, it still is our responsibility to optimize what we know to the benefits of the society. And I think it started very early on in a field that we understand more, which is cochlear implant. And Mike was a pioneer in developing cochlear implant in amazingly successful endeavor. And you should have got into eye. Because there we are not at the same place.
I thought about it.
Okay. Okay, so as I'm saying, well, in the future perhaps, but it was about it brought him, I think, to study populations who obviously have difficulties, but their difficulties are seemingly in high-level skills, but Mike related them to perceptual processing and suggested that perhaps these perceptual processes could be upgraded, and also suggested how to do it, and actually tried to do it, both scientifically and commercially, and was, I think, a source of inspiration for many, many other related projects. Adi Mizrahi and I, in Yonatan, also have, that's what I told you, also have an idea to propose a project that is largely inspired by your earlier work, 2003, I think, about autism, and the concept that autism might be associated with excitation inhibition imbalance, a concept that has a huge impact on the field. Maybe time has come to test it. Maybe we will do that. Anyhow, please do. And so much thankful for your presenting.
It's always a pleasure to be here in this great nation and in this great place. And I got into perceptual processing, translated it much more intelligently through my collaboration with Merav and other people, more anonymous the better, it's descended from Merav as well. So this has also been a place for education, and people in this room have educated me about a lot of things that are important to how I develop as a scientist. I'm going to talk in a superficial level because the subject is complex, and I'm going to talk largely from sort of 10,000 feet about how I think about brain plasticity as it applies to human health and to where we're going with it and what we're going to do with it and what we're trying to do with it now in the immediate the scientific and clinical context. And so forgive me for that. I want to say at the outset that there have been literally hundreds of contributors to the science that are important to me. And you could say an extension, many thousands. And this is a complex discipline in which there's a massive amount of relevant literature. It's a discipline that very few people understand at a deep level because it is so complicated. It's very difficult to present this in a rigidly scientific lecture in 30 or 40 or 50 minutes, which is what I have today. So forgive me for that. And I invite anyone that has questions that are more deeply scientific or relate to mechanism or process or things like this that come to your mind, just communicate with me. And I'll try to accept the fact that you will always get an immediate response. But I will try to answer your questions in time and by referring to other science or scientific things that would relate to it. But when I talk about brain plasticity revolution, it is a revolution. It's slow and sort of evolving into the world. People really don't fully understand the implications of it. It bears for us all, and or how it's going to impact how we think about issues of the brain as it relates to our medicine. That's primarily what I want to talk about, or our societies. Primarily what I want to talk about. And we all know the brain is plastic, and that plasticity is the basis of our brain's creation of the model of our world and of the control of your operations within it. It all occurs in this incredibly magical way within our souls within our lifetime. And the brain made and is still making you, the person you are, in all of its refined detail. You are its creation, and that, of course, is a continuous work in progress. The brain is continually changing itself, you're continually evolving, you're continually remodeling in itself, revising your neurology, unique to you, to all people in the world, revising it across the course of your lifetime. Of course, you can evolve that under control in an intelligent way, or you can do what most people do and just let it evolve all on its own, more or less. And I'm going to encourage you at the end to bring it under your control and try to bring yourself in control of your own self-evolution, which you can do. And what is changing exactly as the brain is changing itself, as it's remodeling itself across your life? Well, first of all, it's revising its detailed wiring. So every time you improve at any skill or ability, or acquire any new skill or ability, the brain basically is specializing its wiring in ways to support that acquisition or support that improvement. And in a sense, you're a product of a massive self-organization of refined ability, skill development. The skills and abilities that you've acquired are very much, springing out of the time in our human history in which you've evolved them. Very specific to our time, very specific to our era, very specific to our culture. But the brain is also changing many other things in its physical and chemical properties, and they're really accounting for or contributing to this specialization. It's just like the human body. When you exercise the human body, everything that supports its strengthening, everything that supports the improvements of its agile operation, everything that improves performance, everything that supports that, the way the blood is supplied to, the way it defends itself, is also strengthened, so too in your brain. Your brain is demanding that you exercise it just as much as the body is demanding you exercise it. Of course, most of us don't, in any practical or deliberate way, exercise it. We should be. It's also advancing the machinery that controls change itself. And that machinery requires that it be engaged. The brain is asking you to have a life, in a sense, of continuous acquisition of new skills and abilities, because that's what engages the machinery that controls its capacity to change or improve itself. And those changes are physical. There's no magic mental side to life, really. It's all physical. There is magic in the sense that there's magic in whatever the health or quality is at the moment of perception that we attribute to an extension to consciousness. But beyond that, there's no magic. Everything the brain produces, everything it does, in a sense, is explained by its physical alteration. And the product of all of that is the creation of a unique and continuously evolving person. Our understanding of these processes of continuous brain remodeling changes everything. For example, it informs us about classical and modern philosophical perspectives about the true nature of our humanity. We arise, you could say, as individuals within our skulls within our lifetime. It explains, you could say, it informs psychology's perspective about the laws that govern human behavior because they reduce the laws of physical process. So ultimately, they will be explained, they will be interpreted, they will be understood at the deepest level in those terms. It informs our scientific and medical understanding of origins of, you could say, all neurological illness. I pointed out Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, other neurodegenerative diseases, but really it informs us about the origins of all neurological illness because they spring from, they are enabled from, they arise from brains that are variously, you could say, set up for the acquisition or development of these diseases or illnesses, which are not going to be diseases, by the way, we'll talk about a little bit later. It informs our medical view of the origin and treatment of psychiatric illness. Amazingly, in 2022, we wait for diagnosis of a psychiatric illness before we treat it. Even though we know that illness arises in individuals, whatever the psychiatric illness, however we label it, whatever we identify as a clinical indication that we're going to treat, even though we know it arises in individuals that are at risk for its origin because of weaknesses, inherent neurological weaknesses, because of issues of organic brain health, or it arises after a prodromal period in which we can see it coming or see it growing in strength and magnitude, and yet we do nothing, really. We sit back, medicine sits back, we sit on the sidelines, we wait for it to occur, wait for it to rise under conditions, and then when the person can no longer, in a sense, effectively control their life in a neurological illness or in a psychiatric illness, then we act. How stupid, how foolish can we be? Because obviously, medicine that relates to neurological and psychiatric illness should be about wellness and not about treatment of disaster. It informs us about our societal and criminal justice system view the origins of, I'll call it, human degradation and of criminal misbehavior and its correction. After all, if someone amongst us can no longer live with us, must be banished from us, can no longer be part of the social group in which we operate, they have given us crystal clear evidence that they have neurological distortions that we should help them overcome. And the last thing we should do is to amplify the neurological distortions that apply to what we commonly do, what we ordinarily do, what we regard as justice, when in fact it is injustice. And in fact, it informs us about our brain health medicine. We need some, we lack it. It informs us about our endowed human potential for continuous lifelong personal growth. We all have it within ourselves to be stronger, better, more efficient, more effective, acquire the ability to extend our abilities. We can change our life, we can improve our life at any time in our life, and yet we take all too little advantage of this in the average human life in 2022 on planet Earth. Now, through those plastic neurological processes, neurological remodeling processes, your brain has accomplished 5 other remarkable things within your skull across your lifetime. It created that incredible special version of your world, as I mentioned. It created the operational you. All of the skills and abilities that define you have been refined and engendered to a substantial extent by brain changing itself. It's created yourself by a massive schedule of self-reference. Every time you feel, every time you sense, every time you act, every time you think, the brain is making a self-reference to the source of the feeling, the action, the thought. And that source is you. You're a massive product of construct. That you, the self, is a construct of these operations. It has the remarkable power of growing anything that's important to you into yourself, becoming a part of yourself, ultimately people you're close to. And it has a remarkable power of absolutely rejecting people from yourself, you could say. Of rejecting, in fact, in the extreme case, all other people from yourself. It's created the captain of your little ship, ultimately that self, most wonderful creation, we could say, within your soul, within your life, that develops the powers of agency. It has unwittingly also put you at risk for progression to host possible life-changing clinical indications, because phenomics contribute to most negative neurological progressions, and in general, in neurological health, that ultimately lots of troubles in general health and lots of troubles in neurological health that we are very slow to respond to and very slow to react to in ways that could basically forestall or prevent or at least delay that clinical diagnosis. So finally, in this sort of introductory line of bullshit, I'd like to talk about 5 major lessons that we've learned from the scientific study of brain plasticity, and the first is use it or lose it. Brain needs exercise, just like the body. Okay, to sustain our brain health, to continue to grow our neurological competencies, we have to exercise the brain. Damn it. We must continue to be active, acquire some new skills and abilities, keep it alive and lively, all across the span of our lives. It needs exercise just as much as your body does. Lots of brain, the average brain is flabby, overweight, just like I am a little bit, probably neurologically too. We need to exercise it. We need to keep it, you could say, in shape. Second is inform us about specific exercise forms that are known to efficiently and effectively recover and sustain physical and neurological integrity, organic brain health, and high neurological performance abilities. Now, when the average kid in my country goes to school, they've given a physical exam, they check their eyes, they check their hearing. Where's the brain exam? It's imagined that if you have a brain, everything in there is fine. In my country, if you go to the doctor says, well, how are you, Mike? I say, I guess I'm okay. Well, you just had your annual brain exam. Why is it that in this most important of organs, there is no brain medicine until disaster occurs? That's nutty. It's crazy for us to think that brains are organically healthy just because you have them. It's crazy to think there's no value in basically trying to define the state of things inside and use that as a basis of determining whether or not you are or are not in good neurological health at that moment in your life. It's crazy. And this is something that we will see evolve in the next decade, I'm sure, to a way in which brain health is brought into everyday medicine, just like the consideration of the health of your heart or your lungs or your kidney or any other organ, where it's a little bit easier to get at it, but not in every way, because the brain has a special virtue. The brain is the only organ in the body that you can directly ask it how it's doing in a variety of ways. So you can actually probe it in a way that advantages your diagnosis of its state. You can look at its performance limits quite easily. You can determine whether or not it's up to speed or still operating with reliability or precision in various things you challenge it to do. But in a way, it's pretty easy for you to determine what its status is, but we don't do it. And we have to stop not doing it. These exercise forms that effectively advance our neurological powers in the brain don't apply at any age. So even though you've been sloppy in how you thought about your brain, or medicine has been sloppy about how they thought about the brain of the patient in front of us, that changes the perspective of what you do. There's still time for correction because the brain is continuously plastic. The third thing that lesson that we've learned is that neurological changes are associated with normal aging, and most other emergent neurological struggles are, by their fundamentally, reversible. So it turns out the fundamental process of the control plasticity are bidirectional. They're bidirectional because the brain basically is making continuous adjustments to sustain operational control. And basically it's advancing as much as it can as long as it's sustaining control. But if conditions arise, vicissitude in life arises, that increases the sort of operational characteristics that necessitate changing operational characteristics of the machine, it relaxes it, those characteristics. So for example, it slows down in its operations. It opens its filters so it looks a little more broadly. Because the most important thing it has to do is to make the most fundamental decisions that relate to its survival. So we have a brain that's bidirectionally plastic. And one of the problems with bidirectional plasticity is that it's very easy to drive the brain in a negative direction as a matter of course. I could take any one of you in a relatively short period of time, destroy the use of your hand, and turn it into a useless claw. I could take any one of you in the course of a month or two, completely destroy your ability to understand what I'm saying. Because I know the rules that would apply that would enable me to drive your plasticity in a negative and a degrading direction. And the fact is, moving in a degrading or negative direction is not necessarily negative from the point of view of survival. And in fact, is at the basis of a lot of struggles that we have in emergent problems we have psychiatrically and emergent problems that we have neurologically. Brain plasticity bidirectionality is operated by the same processes. It's just as easy to grade as it is to advance. Fourth, most neurological and psychiatric functional indications actually arise in brains that are in suboptimal or in poor health, and are a product of a progression of negative or neurologically distorted plastic changes. Now, to cite a simple example, and you could talk about any example, you can look into the literature that relates to, let's say, schizophrenia. And you can say, well, what do psychologists or what do psychiatrists understand about prodromal characteristics of the brain of someone that develops schizophrenia? Usually as a rough circa 20, 25 years of age. You can see schizophrenia coming a long way in advance. And psychiatrists and psychologists have identified about 15 different neurological prodromal indicators that it's coming. These are individual things that collectively are weaker than the average individual, you could say. But across this very unique pattern is a strong indication in life that schizophrenia is coming. And then you could ask, well, how many of those things on that list of 15 things are actually reversible? How many of those things do you think I could change by appropriate forms of perceptual or cognitive training? And the simple answer is all of them. Now, if you take a disease like schizophrenia, you can say, well, if they're all reversible, if I have schizophrenia, genetic illness, what is the probability my identical twin will have it? And the answer is 45%. There's a less than even money chance that my genetically identical twin will also develop schizophrenia. So you can say, well, how many of those 15 things will I have to drive in a normal direction for those changes to be protective of that brain, so the illness not develop? I've been trying for 5 years now to try to get a goddamn psychiatrist to do the experiment to determine whether or not that correction is possible. I'm just about to do it myself. And I'm old, okay? And you have any volunteers in the audience, please see me after we're talking. I'll cite you up. Because I think schizophrenia would be an example of many conditions like this that are entirely uncommon. It is relatively easy to inexpensively assay organic brain health and to identify prodromal stages of or probable future neurological psychiatric disease. Either identifying the weakness that puts you at risk for it, or identifying the actual prodromal condition or indicators that signal is probable not too far distant arrival. Fifth, exercising the salience network and exercising the brain in ways that increase volumetrics, modulates the autonomic nervous system and hormonal regulation on the salience system side, and on the volumetric side, it increases telomere length. Those two things contribute to sustained health and to longevity. So we've been able to show now, in collaboration with scientists at several American universities, that we can have dramatic impacts on the integrity of operations of the autonomic nervous system by training the brain. The brain is controlling the autonomic nervous system. It is its source, primary source of input that's coming from the brain as it's regulating homeostasis as the point of brain signal changes in the demands of controlling vascularization and nutrition to body organs and general making other adjustments in the body as a function of the brain's determination of signaling of those demands. The brain is continually recording information from all of the organs of the body, making a complex set of commands that are making adjustments in the body. So this dynamic is continuing, and what you see in an old brain that's collapsing is you see that this machinery goes to hell. And the brain basically is losing control of homeostasis of organs. And one of the main things that autonomic nervous system is controlling is it's actually regulating the immune system itself. So when it collapses, basically you're losing those things that protect you. You can demonstrate it in a variety of ways that as a function of the integrity of the salience network in the brain, you are safe from the unsafe for the progression of a whole host of life-ending diseases and conditions. So if you live life under conditions in which the salience network is degrading, life will be short. If you live life in the network is sustained, life will be prolonged and relatively healthy. And one of the striking things about people that live to a great ripe old age with their physical health in shape, and the brain not shrinking, brain still an almost normal size, is a healthy salience network. A healthy machinery that's controlling homeostasis, controlling your body flow. People don't think about the health of the brain as influencing or affecting the health of the body nearly so much as they should. Almost all of the literature throws the emphasis in the other direction. Now, it is important that we have a body that still moves and acts, because controlling movement and action in your body is one of the main enterprises of the brain, of course. And it's very hard to experience life and continue to entertain the brain with what's happening out there when the body basically is struggling to move. But so too is it hard for the body to sustain itself without a brain that's healthy and controlling organ performance and body performance and nuancing in all kinds of ways in continuous way, brain to body. Superagers have physically and functionally healthier cell-sustaining networks and notably well-sustained dynamic brain-body homeostatic control. Now, the reason I brought up as as an aside, the fact that when brains are healthy, telomeres are longer, and that when you actually grow or thicken or increase neuropil, telomeres lengthen from whatever state they're in. Telomeric length is a determination of how many cell divisions you have left in the body. So you would intuitively think that increasing morphometry in the brain, increasing the volume of the brain, of brain tissues, would increase telomere length in the body, but it does. And that's another way of saying that a healthy brain, organically healthy brain, is a critical determinant of how long you will live and how healthy you will live in that older age life. So one key aspect of the process of express plasticity that I talked about is the reversibility. And I suppose that Warren and Merav and maybe several other people in the audience have heard me talk about this 4 or 5 times, maybe with the same slide. But we took on this issue initially more than a decade ago. And what we did was basically look in an old rat near the end of life at initially about 15, 16 different physical, functional aspects of that relate to the brain health. We've ultimately extended that list to more than 40 aspects of physical, functional, chemical brain. And we asked if we compare the status of these dimensions of the physical or functional or chemical brain in an animal near the end of life, how many of them are different from in the primate life? And the answer is they're all different, very substantially different. And then the second part of the question is, well, how many of those differences advantage the older brain? And the answer is none of them. In every way, younger is better, younger is faster, younger is more reliable, younger is more strongly myelinated, younger has better chemical constituencies by which things can operate with greater efficiency or accuracy. Younger is superior in every way we could measure. And then we ask the most important question, really, and that is, how many of those things are reversible? And the answer turned out to be everything is reversible. Every dimension of difference is reversible in an animal model and initially in rats. Most things could be reversed back to approach the condition, if not exceed the condition that applied to the animal in the primate life. So every physical, functional, chemical characteristic, and again, we've extended this list to 140, and you could say statistically 40 per 40 is a pretty good indication that everything, literally everything, is reversible. So that's basically what we see in these experiments, in humans, increasingly in animals. So, for example, we see changes in the physical machinery of the brain. We see myelination is degraded and it recovers. We see dendritic and axonal arbor branching their dendrites and axonal arbors are elaborated. We see inhibitory neuron numbers and morphologies restored. We see menoconal sizes and boundaries come back to their youthful condition, very strongly defined. like the already young brain, we see representation of order, and the representation of inputs from the body or inputs from the ears or wherever are restored. We see glial cell branching reoccur. We see, then we see changes in brain chemistry. This is the partial list. Trophic factor expression, receptors and subunit consistencies. All these come back to youthful status. Migratory neurotransmitters are restored in their production and in their quantities. Neurotransmitter transporters are restored. We see blood-brain barrier integrity recovered. We see microglial-based immune response strengthened again. We saw noradrenaline expression recovered. Noradrenaline regulating many things that relate to brain defense. We see nutritional support recovered. Plasticity branching again, reactive hyperemia, small vessel elaboration. All of these things are changing positively as functions of training the animal in relatively simple ways for human. We see processing speed and sequential processing recovered. Response power, reliability, feature representation system, connectivity, I'm talking too fast. We see everything we look at recovered to nearly the normal level in an animal and all substantially restored in a human. So it's all plastic. It's a little bit, again, like the body. If you exercise it in appropriate ways, everything moves in an improving direction. It's as if you have a master switch and you throw the switch, everything improves. Everything gets stronger. And what you could say could be interpreted as being in positive direction. So, how do you turn an old or impaired brain into physically and functionally more capable one? I might say we looked at old versus young, but we also tried to impair our brain. So one of the classes of experiments that we did in several different forms was to raise a brain in an animal under very difficult circumstances. The animal, you could say, had a fear-loaded young life. And we again contrasted the status of its brain as a young adult with the brain of a young adult that had a normal life, a more social and good, happy, rapid life. And we saw the same thing. Everything was deteriorating, everything was degrading, everything was reversible. So those studies are a little less complete, but they indicate that exactly the same applies. If the brain is really struggling, you're going to see broad degradation. The brain, all of that is restored or recoverable to a substantial extent. So you need to appropriately engage and train it to keep it safer and healthier. And of course, neurological rejuvenation will require that be achieved with particular forms of training. I just want to say a little bit about that, because if you know about the cognitive science related training literature, it's a mess. And it's a mess in part because people basically interpret different things to provide a basis for quote, cognitive training. And cognitive training in different hands in different places is not identical. And so there are umpty-ump meta-analysis done on people that have undergone brain training or cognitive training in different forms. And generally, there's a combination of people that use different strategies that are as different as, you could say, golden tin. And as a consequence, the effects are commonly washed out in these studies. The effects are very weak. And that's completely misleading. If the training is in an appropriate form, training effects are almost always strong. And with a relatively limited dose, you almost always see relatively strong changes. And we've known this from the perceptual learning literature, for example, for a long time. In that literature, we see brains change in view, and we can record those changes quite easily. We see performance change in view of relatively limited doses of training. Of course, it changes. Now, how do you turn the brain in a primitive life into an old one? Well, it turns out that it's really an easy experiment to do. So the first way we did it was to just add noise, just increase neurological process noise, just increase the chatter in the brain, to degrade the signal to noise conditions in the circuits of the brain. When you do that, what happens is the brain slows down, and all of these other things move with it in a negative direction. So we've looked at about 30 things now in this dimension, and it's relatively easy to drive things in a negative direction. All the same things on the same list, we think, are driven in the noise. So it really is sort of like we have a master switch. Flip the switch down, and everything goes backward. Flip the switch up, and everything goes forward. there's a variety of ways in which you can increase noise. You say, well, how would that increase noise in everyday life? Well, the first way you increase it is by sitting on your ass all the time. But it turns out that the average human in the advanced nations of the world spends about 10 hours a day sitting in a chair. Now, sitting in a chair is not exactly the best way to engage the brain's control of your body. Maybe it's pretty good at controlling wiggling your fingers, but that's generally pretty much it. And maybe your emotions, because you become a quite sensitive emotional responder by doing that. And of course, you don't just sit in the chair. You sit in the chair providing information that's provided to you by some box. Everything in a box. And this elaborated your reactivity a little bit. It's designed to keep you sort of awake. But again, you're not the source of the action. You're a recipient of the action. You're simply a receiver. You're not a doer. Now you remove yourself as an actor of the world. And removing yourself as an actor of the world is removing yourself from about half of the things that you might imagine you might do in the world. And then, of course, in that world, you've given up basically having to figure out where you are in that world. One of the most important things our brain does is master the landscape, the environment in which they live, and basically map it in the brain and keep track of it. That's why we have a relatively active and nicely constructed hippocampus to help us know where the hell we are. And we're supposed to be basically masters of the universe that we live in a physical sense, as well as in a mental sense. And of course, we substantially abandon at least rehearsing and practicing with it. And in that world, we try to remove every uncertainty. You know, it used to be when humans walked across the surface of the planet, every footfall was uncertain, and it required a little slip in our vision, a little adjustment. And those hundreds of thousands of little moments of, you could say, dynamic correction are lost to us every year, because now we live in a world in which not just every footfall is certain, but we live in a climate-controlled and reaction-controlled environment in which we almost can operate with it in sleepwalking, and that's what we largely do. We basically are accustomed to acquiring our skills and abilities when we're young, and then just keep using them, and more or less on automatic pilot until we die. Well, of course, we're not just looking at these little screens, but we're also kind of addicted to them. And we're fascinated, we're distorted, our brains are distorted in that fascination. They're basically driven a little bit crazy by them. And of course, they are richly rewarding to us at the expense of almost everything else that used to reward us. And of course, we don't really have to operate very much without brains. We can pretty much look up the answer and understand how to do almost everything. And in fact, pretty soon the whole idea is that we can live in a world without a brain at all. It can do it all for us. We can be in it. Imagine that. I was really fascinated to read it the other day that there's a rush on property in the metaverse. Holy cow, people are buying property like crazy. And I guess that means I won't be able to own any. I'm really pretty concerned about it. But anyway, we're in a self-destructive mode. By taking our brains offline, line is my point. By not understanding that our brains need real exercise, by not understanding that we can remove ourselves from the ways our brains are designed to interact with the physical world, we need to continue to engage our sensory organs in a more normal way. We need to engage in our communication with other human beings in the world in a more normal way. However we use these wonderful tools that we have, we get so much from them. I'm not saying abandoning them, I'm saying controlling them and worrying about how to make up for the fact that they are so absorbing to us. But all beyond this, there are also hundreds of vicissitudes in life that befall us, that plausibly contribute to increasing brain noise. Now, I just threw 50 on, these are all from epidemiological studies, but I could have easily expanded this list to more than 200 things in which epidemiologists say these things shorten the time you have before you come to med, right? There's just all kinds of things that shorten the time you come to med. And actually what's happening is you come to med, well, the brain is going south. You have that switch basically thrown in the negative direction. And lots of things can begin to push the switch in the negative direction. And things on this list are the kinds of things that do that. Now, if you knew this, and you were managing your brain health in life, or your doctor does, and one of these things befell you, or one of these things was in your history, you need to react to it. You need to respond to it. You should respond to it. Your doctor should respond to it. Because all of these things can be corrected for. Not most of these things can be corrected for. And you should be correcting for them. This should be part of routinely what happens in the life to keep you, to sustain your wellness, to keep you in the healthy side of your life. Obviously. So fortunately, we know how to throw that plasticity switch in a growth or elastic direction, and that's what you want to do. So we can drive those changes, for one thing, by going into a crash course on the computer, and by training your brain progressively to improve its performance characteristics. And that's basically one of the things that we try to do in applying this in the world, in our forms of brain training. So I want to talk just about a little bit about one example of brain training and talk about systematic changes in your performance abilities. And I want to emphasize that it's relatively easy by using perceptual indices, by looking at performance limits in brains, to index the state of your organic brain health. Now, most people don't think about it, but if you think about how you account in a brain for its speed or accuracy, what is the status of a brain physiologically and physically that's fast and accurate? We know a lot about that. You can look at a brain that's fast and accurate, and you can look at the nature of its circuitry, you can look at how closely it's organized. There are implications about it when I talked earlier about what changes when you exercise the brain. One of the things we're trying to do in that exercise is to improve its speed and accuracy. So when you exercise the brain, you see that fast brains require the brain to be in a certain operational state. It requires that the synapses in the operating in the brain systems have particular chemical characteristics, that they're operating with particular control in the neuronal circuits that relate to the relationship between inhibitory and excitatory populations of neurons in the brain. It relates to the way the brain is organizing itself as a coordinator and coordination of its actions in its mini-columns, in its circuits. A whole series of ways, knowing that the brain is fast and accurate. For example, at high speed, you can accurately recognize what it's just seen or just heard. You know that the brain can only do that if those systems are organically healthy. Now that doesn't mean that everything in the brain is organically healthy, but it's not too complicated to go across the great systems of the brain almost for free and determine whether or not the brain in front of you is organically healthy. The doctor could do it in their office in a self-administered test by a patient in 10 minutes. They could know almost for free that the brain is not organically healthy. So it turns out that as you decline in age in life, on the statistical average, and this is from a classical study that was conducted maybe 25 years ago, in the big red circles, just looking at perceptual speed, it's systematically declining as a function of age. And the change in perceptual speed is very substantial. Beyond your 30th birthday, for every 3 decades, you're moving about a standard deviation. And that's a big change. So moving from your 30th to 90th birthday, you're going to hell, right, on average. So that's the average individual. And that's another way of saying brain health is going to hell, right? Of course, by the average individual at 90 years of age, the brain is shrunken, it's substantially disconnected, you are struggling to maintain control. Okay, so it is a time in which you're seeing this expressed in its behavioral consequences and outcomes, of course. Now you might also see that there are a number of other functions that are paralleling it, and this is routinely seen. Those are representing reasoning, spatial visualization, and episodic memory in this particular graph. I could plot another dozen or so things on that, on the same function. And so all of these other things are deteriorating with deterioration of perception. We can see one thing is not deteriorating, and that's a knowledge base measure, vocabulary. So vocabulary actually continues to grow a little bit until you're about 60, and then sort of levels off with statistical average. So you do continue to accumulate knowledge until you begin to forget it as fast as you learn, right? So everything else is going to hell on the statistical average in the average person. Now, there are many exceptions to this. I could find, if I looked at 100 people, I would find 3 or 4 that are not like this at all. That in fact have not lost hardly anything to their 98th birthday. Most people are like this. Well, it turns out that brain speed is an index of your cognitive reserve. That's actually a predictor of how far you have left in life before you develop Alzheimer's disease or dementia. So the more cognitive reserve you have, cognitive reserve is something that psychologists talk about a lot. And it's a benefit you get from being, let's say, an academic or a scholar. You're scholars. You have cognitive reserve. But everyone in this room just about has cognitive reserve, quite a bit of it. Lucky you. So it's good to have cognitive reserve. Well, let's relate it to brain speed. Brain speed is one of the things that seems to there's been argued the index of it. This is something that some dispute about exactly what cognitive reserve, cognitive reserve to be indexed. But what it is, there's another name for it. It's called brain health. So what cognitive reserve is brain health. If you have a healthy brain, it doesn't decline. If your brain is unhealthy, it does. If you want to know how healthy your brain is, just check your perceptual speed. It's a very good index. It's simple. Okay? It's probably the simplest measure that you can apply, and you can do it almost for free. Now, you can look at brain speed, and you can say, well, how does brain speed vary as a function of age? And this is another way we look at it. In this particular plot, lower is better. And you can see when you're 20, basically people are faster than they are. This is about equivalent subpopulation of individuals between 20 and 90. And when you're 20, you can see that you're faster than when you are at any older age. Your peak when you're young. You get slower and slower as you get older. And now we train everybody at every age. And you can see everybody trained at every age is improving substantially. They've all been trained for about the same period of time. And if you just look at a person, let's say that's, 65, 70 years of age, you see how their brain speed is after they've trained for a few hours. We see that it approaches the brain speed. It isn't equal to the brain speed of an untrained 20-year-old. Now again, if you just think about what accounts for speed, it can only be accounted for by changes in the physical operational characteristics of the brain. That's where it comes from. Performance gains must arise from a coordinated series of brain rejuvenating physical changes. To account for the change in speed, this recovery of speed, now I could show you 50 plots like this, in which we train people for an equivalent amount of time between the age of 20 and 90, and they all look like this. In every operational characteristic in which you look at the performance limit, you train the person for some period of time. And what you see is a recovery of the performance limit to approach, equal to, or approach the performance limits of the person who's the top performer across the distribution. Put it another way, it's pretty easy to grow your cognitive reserve to improve your organic brain health at any age. So how then do we sustain our brain health to assure that our brain span equals our now extended lifespan? Well, the first thing we do is we avoid self-inflicted brain wounding by more consistently living our lives to the advantage of our brain. We don't waste our time, you could say, monitoring our brain in its decline. We actually engage our brain in ways that will sustain it and sustain its health. We reorganize our lives so that we're living our lives to advantage our brain. And that's really important when we think about how we do that in a modern context, and there's so many, in a sense, competing forces. We immediately respond to life's brain-damaging vicissitudes and objectively confirm the restoration of organic brain health when they occur. So if one of the host of several hundred things happens to you or anybody that you care about, that will basically increase the noisiness of the operation of the brain and send it backward, then the intelligent thing to do is to re-engage it and to drive it in the correct direction and to confirm that you've driven its performance characteristics. First of all, you can easily demonstrate the impacts it's had on your brain health if you're just monitoring them. And then you can see whether or not you make the correction. B, if necessary, engage in brain exercise sessions to support health and support our physical longevity. We actively sustain our brain physical fitness because controlling our body is a major brain exercise. And most of all, we deploy data-intensive strategies to manage our brain and general health using an individuated approach to support sustained wellness and high functionality. And actually what we're doing in positive science is we've integrated what we're doing with a company that basically constructs several times every year. They first of all have genomic information, but they're looking from blood at genomic expression. They're also looking at chemical constituencies of blood. They can measure, quantify about 5,000 proteins in blood, several thousand other analytes in blood. They can look at an equivalent number of analytes in the gut biome. They have a complete reconstruction of the medical history of the individual, which they re-elaborate because medical histories are never complete enough. So they re-elaborate it by extensive interviewing and reporting. And they also are trying to reconstruct the life history of the individual. And they're continually re-updating all of this information that goes through a data analysis. And what we're trying to reduce it is to a basis of more intelligently predict. And this is coupled with an elaborate series of performance limiting measures that are applied either through EEG and through behavioral testing on a computer. Everyone works every 6 months or so, goes through a 90-minute assessment schedule, largely on a computer or on an iPad or another pen. And then all of this goes into AI analysis. And basically what it's designed to do is to give the doctor, the frontline medical doctor, a statement about brain and body health, and what they can expect is what they see changing, and what that implies about the risk of progression of disease. And that leads to reaction. The reaction is meant to be sort of holistic. What's wrong chemically? What's wrong neurologically? What's wrong that we can address in any way? So we're trying to basically carry medicine to this more intensely data-driven approach. And so this is what we're trying to do in the face of managing brain health. We're also trying to do this in a brain-only way by using these more limited assessments, not having the advantage of all of this analysis related to So when should we begin this process of continuous medical monitoring and management of our medications? And the answer is obviously today. We should do this, but better still, we should do this from before birth and all across the span of a very substantially longer life. Brain health management should be something that comes into medicine as fast as possible because it will save enormous level of suffering in the world and prevent enormous level of disease and to extend lives. So what changes then when the brain struggles at its own age with assisted overwhelming? Everything struggles. And what can be reversed by training? Well, everything. And how difficult it is to reverse the course of change? Well, I'm sorry, it's easy. And how can training in humans delay such training delay blocking nonsense of common neurological? Can it delay them? And the answer is in the several instances in which we've listed, apparently, and less unsurprisingly, I think we're the only people that aren't surprised on the planet, yes. The answer appears to be yes. And this science provides us with a straightforward strategy of extending both our lifespan and brain span a lot. So, new practical initiative, well, we're trying to manage brain health incredibly great. We're trying to transform our system of justice in the United States is our focus by replacing brain damaging with brain recovery strategies. We're trying to address work-related brain changes. Lots of people are damaging their brains on the job. We're trying to strengthen work-related performance and ability. We're trying to extend body and brain healthy lives by adopting broader data sets that document phenomena interpreted through AI analytics on the path to sustaining brain and body wellness through electric range. So that's what we're up to. We're trying to manage organic brain health incredibly great. So that's all I have to say. I think that I'm old and I'm impatient. And it's been a source of great frustration to me that this science has not been taken more seriously by more people. to lead to more human benefit, because I think it holds tremendous potential for changing societies and changing human lives on a large scale. And so I'm sort of, if that sounded a little bit like a sermon, it's because I'm sort of in a sermon delivery mode in my old age. Get on with it. Especially you young people out there, get on with it and get this done. Yeah, people are struggling and suffering. Thank you very much.
I think we have time for 2 questions. And Nate, you were slower because we need to end by 3. Well, everything is easy.
Am I asking the question?
Okay, Nate will start. Sorry.
Okay. I just was wondering if you could talk about generalizability of training paradigms.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So I was wondering if you could talk.
It's hard to hear.
You're right. Sorry about that. I was wondering if you could talk about generalizability of training paradigms, because I've heard it's like you train on a specific thing, but it doesn't necessarily help.
That's a great question, and it's a subject of substantial contention. On the one hand, when you train an operational system, let's say I train the visual system to respond more accurately at speed with higher reliability and with higher resolution. So I can see that occurring. And that's another way of saying that I now change the elemental processing levels of the brain, for sure, in ways that empower everything it chooses to us. So in a sense, there's generalization to all of operations and vision. You now have the advantage in the receiving end of the machinery of the brain that advantages it in everything it does. So in that sense, you say it's generalizing to its operations in that broad sense. Now, another thing that occurs is that when you drive changes in the way that information is coordinated at the bottom of the machinery, you're actually seeing the more powerful engagement and more powerful plasticity engagement, because now information is more strongly correlated moment by moment in time, and all feed-forward operations. So actually, if you look in the brain, what you see is that all higher-level operations are also empowered by it. They also have a much greater capacity to change and to evolve. Now, you still have, when you think about generalization, when you think about how does this relate to my being better at doing this specific thing, right? This specific complicated thing. Well, it may or may not relate to that, but what it does is it empowers you to get a lot better at that a lot faster. So it generalizes your capacity to change the brain in those more specific operations that might define what you really want to do, right? So it's critical. One thing that people come and think in their mind and say, well, I want to do this complicated thing. I want to learn how to shoot the basketball. But of course, what the brain really has to do is everything that leads up to actually releasing the shot. It has to be better at all of the sub-skills to support that. It has to be better in its machine-like operations. That's why I like to say neurology is not psychology. You do not think of neurological process like a psychologist might think of neurological process. You're not thinking about the action in the end. You're thinking about how you got there, in its details, in the operation machinery of it, and accounted for. That's why I say in the end, the rules will be defined as neurological process rules. They will be. So I know that didn't answer your question. Let me keep one more. Every study just about that we've supported, if you go to the Positive Science website, you'll see that we've supported, I don't mean supported in any sense of control. We don't control any studies that are done in collaboration with us. We don't try to write the papers, we don't try to do any of that. People do the studies, we provide them with the software system in generating studies. They've published about outcomes of about 90 randomized controlled trials. There are about 300 in process in the world as we speak. So in every one of those trials, just about, people looked at generalization. Now sometimes they looked at near, sometimes far, more remote things. Almost always it related in some sort of plausible way to what you might expect to generalize from how people are trained. In every case, the training is simplistic, drives me crazy. what we really should be training to in any individual that struggles is neurological correction. We shouldn't stop until the brain is corrected. But we never do that. It's like, we think of like giving them a pill. Give them a pill. You're going to train for 10 hours or 20 hours. Then we're going to measure it again. We've chosen these 3 things to measure here and these 4 things to measure here. That's our outcome. How simple-minded is that? Really, it's Looney Tunes. I didn't even forget that. Almost every study that's looked for generalization has seen it. Now, I know there's a long literature say that it says that you don't see it. Look at the papers. Just look at them. You can spend a couple of weeks looking at them, and you'll see lots of examples of it. So let me give you one example. People train, of course, in the classic study of useful field of view training. They train for 10 hours. Half the people, 600 people trained. 300 people went back a year later and trained for another 2 to 4 hours. That same group of people, 2 years later, 3 years from the original 10 hours, trained for another 2 to 4 hours. A consequence of the training for 10 hours or more resulted in a 50% reduction of driver-caused traffic accidents in the population. It resulted in a very dramatic decrease in the number of people that progressed to older age mental illness. It resulted in a reduction of the intensity of severity of mental illness if it did occur. It resulted in a 29% reduction of the progression to dementia over the following 10 years. If they worked at it for those 2 booster sessions, a total of 14 to 18 hours, the difference was 49% fewer developed progressive dementia over the following 10 years. Now that's a pretty small medical dose to prevent dementia. If it were a drug, I'd be a billionaire. But it's not a drug. You can get it almost for free. And there's very little investment of time and effort to actually accomplish it. And if you actually drove these individuals and monitored the status of their operational brain health, it'd be a hell of a lot better than 49%. So it's sort of a I just don't know why people understand this and begin to believe that something of general value can occur when you train the brain, even in a very simple, simplistic way, for a very limited period of time. That was a way too long an answer. I'm jet lagged.
So at the margin, what is better for overall brain health? Physical exercise and one of these brain training things, right? So if you have 15 minutes and you have a patient, would you say do this program or would you say exercise for 15 minutes a day?
That's not even close.
Which one?
It's far more valuable to train your brain rapidly. Why would you think you think it's more valuable to train my brain and improve the performance of your body? Well, it would be valuable, right? In fact, it's a big movement now in professional athletics. People are training their brain because it improves the performance of their body. And in fact, we're training people in primarily European football, and you can train them on a computer, and you can train them in action, moving, and with the same goals. And they gain more from being trained on a computer than they get from training in action. But there are a whole series of reasons why you want to train your brain and not your body. Now, let me just say one thing about training your body. Your body is the source of brain control. Brain is controlling your control. So one of the things that's critically important when you train your body is that you think about it as if the brain is the controller of your actions. Put it another way, if you're going to train yourself physically and you're doing it for health, train yourself in a way that engages and challenges your brain to refine its operation. Now that doesn't mean, again, to perfect a jump shot. It means to figure out how to make that jump shot from almost any angle. It means to introduce variety into your actions. It means to continually challenge yourself to evolve them. It's a completely different way that you think about physical action. And physical redundancy or repetition in action from the brain's point of view is, in a sense, destructive. In fact, it is the origin of one of the most common classical neurological disasters of the brain, and that's Parkinson's disease, which grows out of meaningless repetition or repetitive, we could say, invariant actions. That was also a poor answer, but for God's sake, exercise your brain.
That is the one last question.
It's too close to that one, so I'll skip it.
Okay. Anybody else?
You can ask
You can
later.
ask later. Mike,
Right.
thanks.